I shouldn't have gotten on that train. It's not something I was thinking as I stepped aboard. I thought it after, and I keep thinking it now, in that useless way you think about things you can't undo. I should have waited for the next one. Should have stayed on the platform 5 more minutes, bought something from the vending machine, made up any reason not to get on that car at that hour. But I was tired. And when you're tired the way I was tired, the only real thought is getting home. The car was almost empty. A woman sleeping with her forehead against the glass, light blue hospital scrubs all wrinkled, hair thrown up any old way. An older man in the back, team jacket, head tilted to one side, clearly drunk or close to it. Nobody else. I sat down, set my tool bag between my feet, and closed my eyes for a second. I opened them because the train stopped. Not at a station. I know how that feels. The gradual slowdown, the soft pressure right before the platform. This was different. The train just quit, like someone had cut its intention to keep going. Tunnel outside, wet concrete, cables hanging off the wall, an orange signal light blinking way in the back with no sense of urgency. Nothing that explained the stop. I waited. The woman kept sleeping. The drunk man adjusted his neck without waking up. The air conditioning hummed in that same flat, monotone pitch it always does. 1 minute, 2. The lights flickered. They came back, but different, more yellow, dimmer. The kind of light that makes the inside of a car look smaller than it is. It lasted about 4 seconds before everything went back to normal. And in that stretch, I saw my own reflection in the window glass with a clarity I didn't like. Deep bags under my eyes, mouth hanging slightly open, the face of someone who's somewhere they shouldn't be. It was nothing. Exhaustion working against me. I leaned back in my seat and looked up at the ceiling. Then the smell hit, gradual at first. I barely registered it because the subway always has some bad smell mixed into the hot air that circulates through the tunnels. Grease, rubber, old dampness, the metallic odor of the rails. You learn to tune it out, but this one was different from the rest. It was organic in a heavy, warm way, like wet fur and something underneath that I couldn't place, and that for some reason made me start breathing shallower. I sat up straighter. The door at the back of the car, the one separating our car from the next, was closed. It always is. But the glass on it was fogged up from the outside, and as I stared at it trying to figure out what was wrong with that, the handle moved. It didn't open. It just moved. The kind of movement that happens when someone on the other side leans their weight against it without meaning to. An accidental nudge. Nothing. But I looked over at the drunk man in the back. He hadn't moved. And the woman in scrubs still had her forehead against the glass, eyes closed, completely checked out. There were 3 of us in the car. So who was on the other side of that door? I stayed still for a stretch of time I can't quite measure. It's not a lack of courage. I refuse to frame it that way. It's that there's a specific moment when something doesn't add up, where your brain tries really hard to find the simplest explanation before accepting that maybe there isn't one. I did that. I did it long enough to feel stupid about it afterward. The conductor could have stepped out of the front cab through the forward door, walked through the second car, and made it to the back door for some operational reason. It happens. Not often, but it happens. Or maybe some passenger I hadn't noticed when I boarded, someone sleeping in a seat outside my line of sight, who had gotten up while my eyes were closed. I stood up slowly, grabbed my bag by the top handle and walked down the aisle toward the door. The smell got stronger with every step. It wasn't just wet fur. There was something underneath it, something I associate with enclosed spaces where organic things have been sitting too long. Warm and heavy. The kind of smell you feel with your whole body, not just your nose. I stopped about 2 yards from the door. On the other side, through the fogged-up glass, there was nothing visible. Dim light. The corridor of the next car. The empty seats I could see at an angle. No movement, no silhouette. I expected to feel relieved. I didn't. Because the fog on the glass wasn't spread evenly. It was concentrated in a band that was higher than it should have been. Higher than me, and I'm 6 feet tall. Like whatever had breathed heat onto that glass was bigger than an average person, or had its face closer to the glass than anyone would naturally press. I took a step back without deciding to, Behind me, the woman in scrubs shifted on her seat. She didn't wake up, just changed position, crossed her arms over her chest like someone who feels cold inside a dream. The drunk man in the back was just as still as before, chin on his chest, breathing audible from where I stood. I looked back at the door. The handle wasn't moving anymore. I moved one step closer, slowly, and pressed my palm flat against the glass on my side. Cold. It didn't warm up as fast as it should have because there was too much moisture on the other side. I held it there for a few seconds, hand on the glass, trying to hear anything beyond the hum of the air conditioning and the drunk man's breathing. I heard something. It wasn't a clear sound. It was more like a sonic presence, the kind of thing you sense before you process it as sound. Weight redistributing, the minimum friction of something large adjusting itself in a space. It came from somewhere beyond what I could see through the glass, deeper in the next car or past it. I pulled my hand off the glass, went back to my seat, sat down, opened my tool bag because I needed something to do with my hands, and standing there staring at the door wasn't something my nervous system was willing to accept. I ran my fingers over the tools without picking any up. Flathead screwdriver, pliers, the small flashlight in the side pocket that I test every week out of habit. I grabbed the flashlight, didn't turn it on, just held it. The train was still stopped. It had been too long to be normal signal delay. I couldn't tell you the exact number of minutes, but the kind of pause the system makes for routine operational reasons doesn't last like this. At some point, a dispatcher closes the circuit, releases the train, and it moves. That wasn't happening. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Not unusual underground, depending on the stretch. I tried the CTA app on instinct. It froze on the loading screen. I put my phone away. The woman in scrubs opened her eyes. It wasn't gradual. It was all at once, like someone jolting awake from a bad dream and not being sure where they are. She looked at the ceiling first, then at the windows, then at me. There was a red mark on her forehead from where she'd been leaning against the glass. "We stopped?" she asked. Her voice was hoarse the way it gets when you sleep with your mouth open. "We stopped. How long ago?" "Not sure exactly." She looked out the window at the tunnel, then back at me with an expression that was trying to be just irritation, but was carrying something else underneath it. "Did you go check what happened?" I gestured toward the back of the car with my chin, went up to the door, and I took a second before answering, and in that second she read something. I saw it in the way her shoulders shifted slightly. "I don't know," I said. "There's something in the next car." She went quiet. She didn't ask what, which struck me in the moment as either very calm or very smart. The drunk man in the back let out a low snore and sank deeper into his seat, still completely out of it. I looked back at the door, and that's when I noticed the mark. It was at the level of the metal door frame on our side, not on the glass on the frame itself. A long dent, like pressure applied from outside in, at the exact spot where the door meets the wall of the car when it's closed. The kind of mark that wasn't there when I boarded. I would have seen it. I didn't say anything to the woman about it, but she was already looking at the same spot I was, and from the silence that followed, I think she saw it too. Her name was Deb. She told me that matter-of-factly, no ceremony. Introduced herself as she walked over to the seat closest to mine, like someone who'd decided that staying far away didn't make sense anymore. She was probably 38, maybe 40. With that kind of functional calm I associate with people who've worked in emergency settings long enough to stop wasting energy on premature panic. "Deb," she repeated as if I hadn't caught it. "Ryan." She nodded and looked at the door. "You work for the subway," she said. It wasn't a question. "Track maintenance. So you know if this is normal. Train stopping between stations is normal." I paused. "This long isn't." She took that in without comment. I liked that about her. The absence of useless questions. The kind people ask not because they want the answer, but because they need to fill the silence. The silence stayed. I looked at the drunk man. He'd slid a little further down in his seat, jacket twisted, one arm hanging out into the aisle. His breathing was heavy and steady, the kind of sleep alcohol produces, which looks more like unconsciousness than rest. He wasn't a problem for now. I got up. "I'm going to try the radio," I told Deb. She nodded. The maintenance radio is in a compartment high on the wall near the front door of the car. Not the passenger intercom, the operations channel, which in theory any CTA employee can access with their badge. Mine was still in my coverall pocket. I swiped the badge, the panel unlocked. I pulled out the handset. Static. I tried the main channel first. Static. Emergency channel. Different static. Cleaner, with a periodic hiss that meant the system was live, but nothing was answering on the other end. I tried the main channel one more time. "This is Ryan Mercer. Badge 4471. Train stopped between Cermak and Sox." I released the button, waited. "Anyone copy?" Static held for about 4 seconds. Then someone answered. The voice was male, slightly distorted by the channel, but perfectly clear. The flat tone of someone who takes calls all night and has been on autopilot for hours. "Mercer, this is Central Dispatch. We have you on train 714, confirm?" "Confirmed. We received an anomaly alert from the rear door pressure sensor on that train. We're looking into it. Stand by for clearance." "How long?" "No ETA right now. Stay on the line." The line went dead. I turned to Deb. She was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't relief. It was something else. "Rear door pressure sensor," she repeated slowly. "That's what he said. That door." She made a small gesture toward the back door, the one leading to the next car. "Pressure sensor." I didn't answer because she'd gotten there on her own, same place I had. A door pressure sensor logs physical contact with the structure. If an alert had been generated, it was because something had pressed against that door with enough force to trigger the system. More force than a handle moving on its own. More than the car swaying. I went to the door. Different from before. This time I went without hesitating, because standing back from it wasn't giving me any information. I stopped about 3 feet away, flashlight in hand, and shone it directly at the glass. Not the corridor on the other side, the glass itself, the surface, the corners. There was something in the lower left corner of the glass that I hadn't seen before. A mark, not a dent in the metal like the other one. This was on the glass itself. 4 parallel scratches, thin, in the kind of arc you'd make pressing your hand against something with your fingers slightly curled. Scratches on the surface of the tempered glass from the outside in, at an angle that only makes sense if whoever made them was on the other side pushing through. It settled in my stomach in a physical way. "Ryan." Deb's voice was different. I turned around. She was standing in the aisle looking toward the back of the car, at the corner where the drunk man had been sitting. It was empty. It wasn't empty 2 minutes ago. I had looked at him before going to the radio. He was there, jacket twisted, arm hanging down. Now the seat was empty and clean as if it had never been occupied, except for the team jacket, which was folded on the seat with a kind of care that didn't match the state he'd been in. The jacket. Folded. That wasn't the detail of someone who'd woken up nauseated and stumbled to the bathroom without thinking. It was the detail of someone who had been removed, and something had folded the jacket afterward. "The back door," said Deb very quietly. I looked. The door leading to the next car was ajar, an inch, maybe 2. Not enough to see anything on the other side, just enough to let in a thread of hot, dark air from the corridor beyond. And through that narrow gap, from our side, came a smell that filled the entire car within seconds. Wet fur, rust, and something underneath all of it that was warm and alive and wrong, in a way I can't describe properly, without sounding like someone who's lost their mind, but that anyone in that car at that moment would have recognized, without needing it explained. The smell of something large that had just fed. Deb didn't say anything. Neither did I. The thread of light coming from the corridor beyond the door disappeared for a second, as if something very large had passed on the other side. Deb moved first, not away from the door, toward it 2 quick steps, and she threw the manual latch with both hands, that metallic click the system makes when you force the emergency lock. She did it before I'd processed that it was what needed to be done, and I stood there watching her for a second with the kind of gratitude you feel for someone who acts while you're still frozen. "Will that hold?" she asked without turning around. "For a while." She stayed with her back to me, hands still on the door, and I watched her shoulders rise and fall once, slowly. Controlled breathing. Someone who'd learned that falling apart doesn't help. "The man," she said. "I know. Did you hear anything?" "No." She finally turned around. She had an expression I recognized. Not exactly fear, but the look of someone running a calculation they don't like the outcome of. "I work in the ER at Mercy," she said. 10 years. I've seen a lot of things that shouldn't have been able to come through a door." I didn't answer right away because I didn't know where that sentence was going. "What I've never seen," she went on, "is something leave without anyone noticing. Leave, fold up someone's clothes and walk away." He didn't fold it. She stared at the empty seat for a moment. "No," she agreed. "He didn't." The train groaned. Not an engine sound or a system sound. It was structural, the kind of sound metal makes when it takes on weight that's unevenly distributed. It came from above, from the ceiling, moving from the direction of the back door toward the front of the car, slow and deliberate, like something getting its bearings in the dark up there. We both looked at the ceiling at the same time. Nothing visible. White panels, fluorescent bulbs, the ventilation channel running down the center. But the sound continued for another 4 seconds before it stopped. And when it stopped, the silence that followed was different from the silence before. Denser, more aware, the kind of silence that exists because something decided to go quiet. "There's access to the roof from the outside," I said low, more to myself than to her. "What?" "Maintenance panel on top of each car. On the outside." I paused. "If it got in through the roof, it got in before the stop. Before we boarded, maybe." Deb looked at me in a way I didn't like. "Or it got in when the train stopped and the lights cut out," she said. "When we weren't looking at the windows." That was the right explanation. I knew it. I hadn't liked hearing it because it made things more concrete than I wanted them to be right then. I went back to the radio. Static. Main channel, emergency channel, the secondary channel that's supposedly monitored around the clock. Nothing. The periodic hiss from before was gone. The system was active, but it was like shouting into an empty room. I pressed the button anyway. "Central Dispatch, this is Mercer, train 714. I need an immediate response. We have a situation on board. Does anyone copy?" I released the button. The handset was silent for about 3 seconds. Then came a sound that was not a human voice and was not static. It was breathing. Heavy, wet, with an interval between the inhale and the exhale that was too long. The rhythm of something very large at rest. It lasted maybe 8 seconds before the line went completely dead, and during those 8 seconds I stood there with the handset pressed against my ear, unable to pull it away, listening to that rhythm rising and falling with a calm that was the most disturbing thing that had happened up to that point. Calm. It was calm. I put the handset away slowly. Deb was watching me from the middle of the car. She'd heard it through the speaker volume. I could see it on her face. "Ryan," she said, and for the first time her voice carried something beyond control. Not panic, but the crack just before panic. "What is that?" It wasn't a question. "I don't know," I said, a lie. Not a complete lie. I genuinely couldn't name it, couldn't categorize it, had no professional or personal frame of reference that gave me vocabulary for it. But some part of me, the part that lives below reasoning and that 11 years underground had kept well calibrated, that part knew enough. It knew the thing was alive, knew it was large, knew it was in 2 places at once, on the roof and beyond the door, in a way that didn't fit inside the dimensions of anything I'd ever known. I sat down on the nearest seat because my legs decided it was necessary. Deb stood in the aisle for a moment, then came and sat in the row in front of me, sideways so she could see me, and the door at the same time. "The man," she said again. Quieter now. "Don't think about that right now. I'm a nurse, Ryan. I've spent 10 years thinking about the things people don't want to think about." There was no answer to that. The car stayed quiet for a stretch of time I couldn't measure. The lights held steady. The air conditioning kept up its flat, monotone hum. Outside the windows, the tunnel sat still and indifferent. The same wall of damp concrete, the same hanging cable, The same orange light blinking in the distance with no urgency at all. Everything the same. Everything completely wrong. It was Deb who heard it first. She raised her hand, a small instinctive gesture, the kind that means shut up without having to say it, and tilted her head slightly to the left, listening. I listened too. Footsteps. Not from the other side of the back door. Not from the roof. From the direction of the front door, the opposite end of the car, the side where we'd boarded, the side I had until that moment assumed was safe because it was the side of the conductor's cab, the side that faced the front of the train. Heavy footsteps, with the wrong rhythm, getting closer. We didn't move. There's an instinct that freezes you, not cowardly, just ancient, older than any conscious decision. The body understands before the mind that movement draws attention. And for about 3 seconds, Deb and I stayed completely still, listening to the footsteps get closer on the other side of the front door. Heavy, irregular in a specific way. Not the irregular of someone with a bad leg, but the irregular of something that had learned to use 2 legs without having been born to do it. A weight that came down differently on the left foot than the right, with a gap between each step that was too long, as if every shift of weight required a separate decision. They stopped, directly on the other side of the front door. Deb leaned slightly toward my ear. "Is the conductor's cab behind that door?" "No," I answered, as quiet as she was. "The cab is at the front of the first car. This is the third. That door leads to the second. So it came through the second car." "Yeah, and now it's between the two." I didn't answer because that was exactly it. The front door had the same system as the back one. Manual emergency latch, tempered glass, the metal frame. The difference was I hadn't locked this one. Hadn't thought to lock it because my entire attention had been on the back door. The smell, the folded jacket, the sound on the roof. I got up slowly. Deb grabbed my wrist. Not hard, just contact. The kind of gesture that says wait without saying anything. I pointed at the latch with my eyes. She understood. Let go of my wrist. I moved down the aisle in short steps, walking close to the wall where the floor sways less, where the metal creaks less. I don't know if it made a difference. It probably made no difference at all. But I needed some illusion of control over the noise I was making. The front door had the same fogging on the glass as the other one had had, except worse. It was thick, almost opaque, concentrated in the center and running slightly down the edges, like steam in a closed bathroom. Heat breathed up close, very close, by something that had been standing there long enough to warm the entire pane. I put my hand on the latch, locked it. The metallic click sounded too loud in the silence of the car. From the other side, immediately a sound. Guttural, low, with no defined pitch. It wasn't a growl, and it wasn't a moan, and it wasn't anything I'd heard before. It was all three at once, filtered through a throat too large for any of them to come out clean. It lasted about 2 seconds. Then it stopped, and the glass bowed. It didn't break. It bowed. Deformed slightly inward, millimeters. The kind of pressure you only notice because the light shifts in the reflection off the surface. Something had pressed from the other side with enough weight to flex 6mm tempered glass. I stepped back 3 paces without taking my eyes off the door. The pressure stopped. The glass came back. Deb was standing in the middle of the aisle when I turned around, and she was holding the red fire extinguisher that's mounted on the wall near the emergency panel. She had it by the nozzle, both hands, like someone who had already figured out she wasn't going to use it as a fire extinguisher. For one absurd moment, I almost said it wasn't going to help. I didn't. "It's on both sides," she said. "I know." How is that possible? It was the right question, and I had no answer. One creature isn't in 2 places at once. But the sound from the roof had been real. The footsteps at the front door had been real. And the back door was latched because there was something beyond it that justified locking it. The only explanation that made sense was that it wasn't one. There were 2. I stored that thought somewhere deep and shut the door on it, because if I let it surface right now, I wasn't going to be able to do anything useful for whatever time I had left in that car. "Come here," I told Deb. We went to the car's central panel, the gray metal box on the side wall between the 2 boarding doors. I opened it with my badge and stood there with the flashlight looking inside. taking inventory of what was there. The lighting system circuit breakers, the emergency communication module, the 2 AC circuits, and in the bottom corner, behind a small placard that read high voltage in faded red letters, the local power supply control panel for the car. Deb looked over my shoulder. "Can you do something with that?" "Maybe. I don't know what yet." "That's reassuring." "It wasn't meant to be." She made a short sound that, under other circumstances, would have been a laugh. I closed the panel. Not because there was nothing useful in there. There was. I was already thinking about how to use it. But because it wasn't time yet. And opening that panel all the way right now would black out the car as a side effect. And blacking out the car right now was the last thing I wanted. I leaned against the wall and looked at both doors at the same time. One at each end of the aisle. Both closed. Both locked. Both with clean glass for now. The AC hum kept going. The lights held steady. The tunnel outside sat still. And then the entire train lurched. It wasn't a system vibration, wasn't a rail tremor, it was impact. Something had struck the outside of the train with enough force to move metal against metal, and the sway was lateral, coming from the roof, from the right side, as if an enormous weight had jumped from somewhere above and landed against the side of the car. The lights flickered. When they came back, the glass on the back door was clear. The glass on the front door was clear too. Deb and I stood in the center of the car, back to back, each of us watching a door. Nothing, no sound, no smell, which was somehow worse than everything that had happened before. The silence lasted 7 minutes. I know because I kept watching the clock on the emergency panel, the red numbers in the upper corner of the communication module, 12:51 a.m. when the impact noise stopped, 12:58 a.m. when something finally moved again. 7 minutes of absolutely nothing, which was more unsettling than any sound, because silence like that isn't absence. It's a choice. Deb had lowered the extinguisher but hadn't let go. She kept it hanging at her side, arm slightly bent, like someone holding a heavy bag on a crowded bus. She didn't ask me what to do, didn't say anything. We both stood in the center of the car, one of us facing each door, and we waited. The back door exploded inward. It wasn't gradual pressure, wasn't the frame giving way slowly. It was a single violent blow that tore the latch clean off the wall and slammed the door against the opposite frame with a metallic crash that filled the entire car. Deb screamed, stumbled back. I stumbled back with her without realizing it, and for a second the doorway stood open and dark and empty. Then it came in. It had to duck to get through. That's not a figure of speech. The door frame is 6.5 feet tall, and it had to bend its neck and angle its shoulders inward, because otherwise it wouldn't fit. And even so, both shoulders scraped both sides of the frame at the same time as it passed. When it straightened up on our side, inside our car, its head was about a foot from the ceiling, 6.5 feet, maybe more. I stood there watching, and my brain did something I didn't expect. It tried to fit what it was seeing into something familiar, some category, some file. It took less than a second to give up. There was no file. There was only that thing, standing in the aisle, watching us with a calm that was the most wrong thing about all of it. Bipedal, completely upright now, filling the height of the aisle from the neck up. The legs were long and the knee joint bent differently from a human's. Not drastically different, but enough that every time the weight shifted from one side to the other, there was a wrong angle in the middle of the movement. The arms hung too long at its sides, with the hands, if you'd call them hands, palms turned slightly forward, like someone keeping their balance on an unsteady floor. The fur was dark. Not black, dark, the kind of very deep brown that only looks black in bad light. Thick and matted in different directions. Wet, smelling of the same smell that had been following us since Kermack, except now there was no wall between us and the source. The face. I saw the face. That was what broke whatever attempt I was still making to keep this in the category of the inexplicable, the possibly explainable, the thing whose origin I'd figure out later. The snout was long, the nostrils opening and closing slowly in a rhythm that wasn't nervousness. It was mapping. It was smelling us with the same focus I'd give a technical schematic. The eyes were deep-set and yellowish, and they watched me with a concentration I recognized from large animals, the kind of focus that carries no anxiety, no anger, no pleasure, just assessment. Deb said something quietly, barely above a breath. My God, it's a werewolf. Not hysterically. She said it the way someone delivers a diagnosis they didn't want to make. The clinical voice of someone who names a thing because naming it is the only way to keep functioning. And it was. I had no other word. There was no other word that fit what was standing in the aisle of car 714 at 12:58 a.m. on a Friday in March 80 feet below Michigan Avenue. Werewolf. The word was absurd, and it was the only one that worked, and I had no mental space to deal with that contradiction. So I didn't. It didn't lunge immediately. It stood there, breathing, watching us, its head tilting slightly to the left in a gesture that was simultaneously animal and disconcertingly familiar. The nostrils kept working. A sound came from its throat, guttural, long, with no defined pitch, and the air in the car vibrated with it in a way I felt in my teeth. Deb raised the extinguisher. "Don't do that," I said quietly. "Why?" "Because if it hasn't lunged yet, it's because it's deciding something. Don't give it a reason to stop deciding." She lowered the extinguisher an inch. Just one. The werewolf turned its head toward Deb when she moved, a fast, precise motion that had nothing hesitant in it. And then, slowly, it took a step in our direction. The floor of the car sank audibly under the weight. "The panel," said Deb without taking her eyes off the creature. "Not yet." "Ryan." "Not yet. Back up slowly." We started backing up together toward the front end of the car, one step at a time, eyes on it the whole way. It advanced at the same pace, unhurried, as if it knew with absolute precision that there was nowhere we were going. There was somewhere. The electrical panel was behind us. Except to use it, I needed to open the box, identify the right circuit, force the overload in the return module. And doing all of that with that thing 3 yards away was different from doing it with that thing on the other side of a locked door. Completely different. "How much time do you need?" Deb asked, her voice low and steady. I looked at the panel. I looked at the creature. "More than we have." Deb threw the extinguisher. "Not at it. To the side, against the right window of the car. Hard enough to make a metallic crash that filled the whole space." The werewolf snapped its head toward the noise in an immediate reflex, a fast and total turn, and in that second I threw myself at the panel. Badge, click, cover open. I heard the sound it made when it turned back, that pitchless guttural, shorter this time, tighter. And I heard the heavy footsteps on the metal floor, and I didn't look. Couldn't look. I kept my eyes on the panel and my fingers on the breakers and tried to find the right circuit with my hands before I found it with my head. "Ryan." Deb's voice was different now. "Hold it off." "With what?" "With anything. 30 seconds. I don't know what she did. I heard movement behind me, heard her shouting. Not in pain, a deliberate shout, the kind you use to pull focus. And heard the footsteps stop about 6 feet from my back. The smell was so strong it almost had a taste. My fingers found the return module. That was the problem. A localized overload on the car's power feed circuit could generate a pulse through the external metal structures. Yes, I'd thought about that. What I hadn't thought about, or had thought about and shoved under everything else because it was too much to process, was that the external metal structures included the floor, included the grab bars, included everything Deb and I were touching at the moment of the pulse. If I forced the module right now the way I'd been planning, we'd both go with it. I stopped with my finger on the breaker. Behind me, the werewolf made a sound that was no longer assessment. It was something else, higher pitched, more immediate. And I heard Deb take 2 quick steps back toward the wall. I thought fast, which in practice meant thinking wrong twice before thinking right. The lighting circuit was separate from the traction circuit. The return module fed both, but there was an intermediate breaker between the two systems. A safety isolator the CTA had installed after a 2019 incident I'd read about in a technical report, without ever imagining it would matter. If I killed the isolator first and then forced the overload only on the traction circuit, the pulse would go into the external structures without running through the interior floor. The car would go completely dark. but it wouldn't fry us along with it. "Deb," I said, finger already on the isolator. "When the lights go out, get on the floor and don't touch anything metal. Nothing. Grab bars, doors, walls. You hear me?" "I hear you. Now." I cut the isolator. The car went dark. Total darkness. Not the dark of a room with the lights off, but underground dark, which is different because there's no residual source in any direction, no appliance LED, no gap around a window, absolutely nothing. The kind of dark that has weight. I heard the werewolf in the dark. I heard it because it moved. Footsteps on the metal floor, the breathing, the low guttural sound it had been making almost constantly now, like an engine idling. It was getting its bearings. The nostrils working, I knew, mapping the space by smell the same way it had been doing from the start. And in the dark, that was enough for it in a way it wasn't for us. My fingers found the traction breaker. At that moment, it found me. It wasn't a claw. It was a body impact. The shoulder or the arm, some part of it that was passing and caught me glancing, and it was enough to throw me against the side wall with a force that knocked the air out of me. My tool bag hit the floor somewhere away from me. I felt the cold metal wall against my back and slid about a foot before I steadied myself, and my right hand was still on the panel, fingers still on the breaker, because I'd grabbed onto it on impact by pure reflex. It was standing less than a yard away. I knew by the smell, the breathing, the heat radiating off it like an engine that had been running too long. In the dark, I heard it breathe. I heard it find me. Its head had to be close to mine because the breathing was large and close and warm on the right side of my face, and I stayed completely still, hand on the breaker, trying not to breathe too fast, trying not to let the smell of my own fear run any higher than it already was because it was probably already too high. It didn't lunge. It stood there, smelling me, with that calm I had learned to fear more than any sudden movement. Assessing. I thought about Carla. I thought about the boys, not as some dramatic flashback. I thought about them the way you think about something you might not see again, quickly, without ceremony, with a kind of very clean sadness that has no room to develop. Then I turned the breaker. The pulse was immediate, not a sound, a sensation, a vibration that rose through the panel, through the wall, through the external structures of the car. It lasted less than 2 seconds. In the dark, I couldn't see anything, but I heard it. A dry, sharp crack that came from the ceiling and the walls at the same time, and the werewolf made a sound I hadn't heard before, different from anything, loud and uncontrolled, and the footsteps were heavy and chaotic and crashed into something before they stopped. Silence. Then its breathing. Still there. Uneven now, different from before. The emergency lights came back on by themselves. The backup system, yellow and dim, that switches on automatically when the main circuit goes down. It took about 3 seconds, and when it came up, I saw the car. Deb was lying on the floor between 2 seats, hands away from the metal looking at me. The werewolf was about 12 feet away, leaning against the side wall, one hand resting on the nearest seat, its head hanging low. The uneven breathing continued. The pulse had done something. Not what I wanted, not enough, but something. It raised its head slowly, looked at me, and stood up straight. He was hurt, not incapacitated, hurt. There was a difference, and I needed a second to understand what it was, because my first instinct when the lights came back was relief. And relief was the most dangerous thing I could feel right then. The pulse had done something to his left side. The hand that had been resting on the seat moved differently from the right one. Not paralyzed, but with less precision, the fingers opening and closing slightly like someone testing their own strength after taking a shock. His head was hanging low in a way that wasn't submission, it was orientation. He was recalibrating, redistributing, figuring out what still worked. Deb got up from the floor slowly, without making noise. The werewolf didn't look at her. It kept looking at me. I didn't move. There's a logic to situations like this that you don't learn anywhere. You only discover it in the moment. And the logic was this. He was assessing again. The pulse had changed something in the equation, and he was running the calculation over. And while he was running it over, he wasn't advancing. Every second I could hold that state was one more second. Deb reached my side without me seeing her move. She had the extinguisher back in her hand. She'd picked it up off the floor when she stood. "The pulse wasn't enough," she said, barely above a whisper. "No. Can you do it again?" "The circuit needs time to recharge." I paused. "And the second time he'll know what it is." She didn't answer. There was no useful answer. The werewolf took a step. The floor sank under its weight, and the left hand came off the seat and it stood completely upright in the aisle. Head tilted slightly, and I could see clearly what the pulse had done. The fur on the left side of its chest was different, matted in the wrong directions, and there was a stiffness in the left shoulder that hadn't been there before. It wasn't enough, but it was real. It took another step. "Go to the front door," I told Deb without taking my eyes off it. "And you?" "Undo the latch and stand to the side. Don't open the door yet. You're planning something stupid." "Probably." She went. I heard her footsteps in the aisle, quick and controlled, and the werewolf turned its head that way for a moment. Just a moment, before turning back to me. I used that moment, not to run, to grab my tool bag off the floor about 6 feet from where I was standing, which had fallen when it hit me in the dark. I crouched down, grabbed the handle, and when I straightened up it was 6 feet closer than before, and I understood the moment was over. Its right hand, the one that still worked, came in from the side. Not a claw. An open palm strike, and it caught my left shoulder with a force that spun me 180 degrees and sent me into the row of seats on the right side. I fell across the seat and slid down to the floor between 2 rows, bag still in my hand, left shoulder with a pain that was information before it was pain. Something had given way in there, muscle or ligament, and I'd find out how bad it was when the adrenaline wore off, and there was no plan to let the adrenaline wear off anytime soon. I got up, slower than I wanted to. The left arm cooperated, but with reservations. It was watching me again. Head tilted the other way now. Nostrils opening and closing. The guttural, idling sound had come back, steady, and there was something in that steadiness that I read as patience. It had time. It knew it had time. The car was finite and there were 2 of us, and the only place we were going was the end of a 72-foot aisle. I opened the bag with my right hand. Didn't take anything out yet. Just opened it because I needed to know what was in there, and because working your hands sometimes holds the attention of large animals, and I was willing to test any theory that cost me little. It looked at the bag, stopped advancing for maybe 3 seconds. 3 seconds was something. "Ryan." Deb's voice from the other end of the car, controlled but with a crack in it that hadn't been there before. "There's something at the front door." I didn't look. Couldn't look. "What are you seeing?" "The glass is fogging up." There were 2. I'd known there were 2 since the 5th chapter, and I'd stored that thought somewhere deep, and now it came back with interest. The werewolf in front of me was between me and Deb. The one on the other side of the front door was between Deb and whatever exit I hadn't found yet. I pulled the pipe wrench out of the bag. 17 inches, 3 pounds, the one I use for track connections in tight spaces. I held it by the handle with my right hand and made the only calculation available. The werewolf in front of me was hurt on the left side. The left shoulder had less mobility. If I stayed on his left side, I had maybe half a second more before the reaction. Half a second was something. It lunged. This time with no warning, no assessment step. It came straight, too fast for its size, and I went left and swung the pipe wrench down on the shoulder the pulse had damaged with everything I had in my right arm. The sound it made stopped time for a moment. Loud, uncontrolled. The same sound that had come out in the dark when the pulse hit, and its left arm buckled, and it slammed its shoulder into the side wall and the window glass shuddered but didn't break. I got 2 steps back, right arm buzzing from the impact, and it was up against the wall looking at me with an expression that, if I had to describe it, I'd call anger. Not patience anymore. Anger. "Deb," I said out loud, not caring about noise anymore. "Open the door. There's something on the other side." "I know, open it anyway." A pause. "Ryan." "Open the door, Deb." The werewolf threw itself forward. The front door opened and the second one came in. It was smaller. Not by much. Smaller the way a large car is smaller than a truck. A difference that only matters if you're trying to get past both of them in a narrow aisle. The fur was lighter, almost brownish under the yellow emergency lighting, and it moved differently from the first one. Faster, less deliberate, with an energy the other didn't have. The kind of movement that doesn't assess, it just reacts. Deb threw the extinguisher at it. She connected. Square in the chest, hard enough to make it step back once, and in that second she threw herself sideways between two seats, and the second werewolf came through where she'd been with its hand open, and the claw ripped the steel handrail off its wall bracket like it was paper. I was backing away from the first one. The first one was pushing me toward the back of the car, unhurried now. The left shoulder less cooperative, but the right one fully functional, and the pipe wrench in my hand had become a small detail it had factored into its calculations and worked around. Every time I raised my arm, it changed the angle. It was learning. Large animals learn fast when they're angry. My back found the rear wall of the car. Nowhere left to go. The wall behind me, the first one in front of me about 10 feet away, and on the other side of the car, the second one was reorienting toward Deb, who was crouched between the seats, holding what was left of the ripped-off handrail. I looked at the ceiling, the ventilation panel that had been shifted out of place back when the weight was above us during the 7 minutes of silence. It still had the visible gap. It wasn't an exit. It was an idea. "Deb," I said out loud. "The center ventilation panel. Can you reach it?" She looked up at the ceiling. The second werewolf was between her and the panel, about 8 feet away. "No. I can." The first one was 6 feet from me. The panel was about 15 feet in its direction, toward the exit in the center of the car, away from the wall where I was standing. To reach the panel, I needed to get past it or around it, and getting around something in an 8-foot wide aisle with that in the middle was geometry that didn't work out, unless it moved first. I took the pliers out of the bag with my left hand. The shoulder complained, but the arm worked. I held the pliers in my left hand and the pipe wrench in my right, and did the most stupid and most available thing. I advanced. Not straight at it. Diagonally to the right, toward the side aisle between the seats and the window. It moved with me, the right shoulder swinging my way, and I dropped the pliers on the floor in front of its feet. It didn't do anything. Obviously it didn't do anything, but it looked. Half a second. I went through the side aisle, crouched down, using the seats as a partial barrier, and the seats weren't going to stop anything, but they created enough of an angle that when its arm came, it caught the seat back before it reached me. The plastic of the seat back exploded. I kept moving. 15 feet. 10. The panel was above my head. I straightened up and hit the panel with the pipe wrench once, hard at the corner where the gap already was. The panel gave inward. Didn't fall. It bent, opening a space of about 8 inches on the left side. The ventilation duct behind the panel wasn't an exit. It never was. But the cables were. There was a bundle of signal cables running through the duct. I knew because I'd installed identical cables in routine maintenance jobs. Knew the color code. Knew what each one fed. The dark blue was the emergency communication circuit, separate from the main system. Separate from the circuit I'd overloaded before. If I could connect the dark blue directly to the return module on the electrical panel, the overload wouldn't come from the car's own system. It would come from outside, from the track signal line, which carried a completely different load. Larger, uncontrolled. It wasn't surgery. It was all or nothing. The first werewolf reached the seats behind me. I heard the seats give way. Not one at a time, an entire row torn off the floor as if the bolts didn't exist. And I didn't look. I pulled the dark blue cable with my right hand, pulled until I had enough length, and moved down the aisle toward the electrical panel on the wall with the cable in my hand, and the bundle unspooling behind me. The second werewolf was between me and the panel. Deb was behind it, up against the side wall with a cut on her arm that I hadn't seen happen, holding what was left of the steel handrail in both hands, and a look on her face that I recognized as the same one I must have been wearing. The look of someone who has run out of options and still hasn't stopped trying. She saw the cable in my hand. She didn't know what it was. But she watched my eyes go to the electrical panel and back to the second werewolf standing between us. And she did what I would have asked her to do if I'd had time to ask. She swung the handrail into the side wall with everything she had. The crash was enormous, and the second one spun toward the noise, and I went under the arm it threw open in the turn. Felt the claw pass inches from my back, and I reached the panel. Badge, click, cover open. The first werewolf was 12 feet away and closing. My right hand found the return module. The dark blue cable in my left hand, the stripped end, 2 inches of bare copper, 9 feet. Deb shouted something I didn't catch. 6 feet. I pressed the copper against the module. The world turned to light and noise and pain. It wasn't like the first pulse. The first pulse was controlled, calculated. A circuit I knew being pushed past its limit within parameters I understood. This was something else. The external signal line carried a load I had estimated, and the estimate was wrong. And when the copper touched the module, the feedback came back through the cable, through my arm, through my right shoulder that was already compromised, and threw me against the wall hard enough to black the world out for a stretch of time I can't measure. I came back with the smell of burning metal in my nose. I was on the floor. The wall behind me, the cold floor underneath, the tool bag somewhere I couldn't see. The emergency light was still on, yellow, dim, the whole car in that shade that made everything look old. I tried my right arm. It responded, but with a delay that wasn't normal, like a signal passing through damaged cable. I sat up. Deb was about 10 feet away, also on the floor, pushing herself up with both palms flat against the ground. The cut on her arm was bleeding more than I'd noticed before. The sleeve of her light blue scrubs was dark from the elbow down. She looked at me first, confirmed I was upright, and only then looked at the rest of the car. I looked with her. The first werewolf was down near the row of torn-out seats, about 12 feet from where I was. Not dead. I knew it wasn't dead because the chest was moving, uneven. The breathing I'd learned to recognize still there, just different. Slower. With gaps between breaths that lasted too long. The second one wasn't visible. That was either going to be a problem in the next 10 seconds, or it was going to be a solution, and I had no way of knowing which before I looked. Deb. My voice came out rough, like the shock had passed through my throat too. Can you stand? I'm already standing. She was. She'd gotten up while I was still cataloging the damage to my own body. And she was on her feet with what was left of the handrail still in her hand, scanning the car with a focused, methodical attention that I recognized as the same one she probably used in an ER after a serious incident. Where are the injured? Where are the threats? In that order. The second one's gone, she said. I saw. The front door is open. I looked. It was. The door she'd opened to let the second one in was still open. The dark corridor of the next car visible beyond. Empty as far as I could see. It went back to the other car, I said. Maybe. Probably. There was no way to confirm without going to check, and going to check was the last thing left in my inventory of ideas. The first one moved. It didn't get up. It rolled slightly to one side. The left shoulder that was already compromised now completely out of commission by the way the arm was positioned. Its head lifted off the floor a few inches, nostrils opening and closing, the yellowish eyes sweeping the car with a slowness that wasn't the calm from before. It was effort. I got all the way up. The right arm worked well enough. The left shoulder was information I was going to process later. I went to the tool bag, grabbed it by the strap with my right hand, and walked to Deb without taking my eyes off the first one. We need to go to the next car, I said quietly. She looked at me like I'd said we need to jump off the train. The second one is in there. Maybe, and maybe the second one is on the roof or at the back door, or somewhere we don't know about. I paused. What I do know is that this one is going to get up. She looked at the first one, looked at the front door, made the calculation I'd already made. You go first, she said. I went. The corridor between cars was cold and loud in a way the interior wasn't. The sound of the rails came in through gaps I hadn't known were there. The coupling metal vibrated, and the temperature dropped about 10 degrees in that 3-yard space between one car and the next. I went with the flashlight in my left hand, lighting the way ahead, and crossed into the second car without finding anything. The second car was empty. Seats intact, handrails in place, emergency lights on in the same dim yellow. No fur, No smell. No, there was smell. The smell was everywhere now, soaked into the air of the whole system. But there was no fresh presence, no static weight that I'd learned to associate with proximity. Deb came in behind me. "Lock the coupling," I said. She latched the door on our side. I heard the click and felt something in my chest that wasn't safety, but was the available version of safety in that moment. We went to the middle of the car. We sat down. It wasn't a decision. It was our legs deciding on their own that they'd reached their limit, and that the seat was right there, and that this was enough for now. Deb sat on the opposite side of the aisle, the scrub sleeve pressed against the cut with her palm. Head tilted slightly back, eyes open, looking at the ceiling. We stayed like that for a while. On the other side of the locked door, I heard the first one get up. Heard the heavy footsteps on the metal floor, uneven now, dragging on one side. Heard it find the door and stop there. The door shuddered once, just once, and then stopped. Then silence. Not the silence of choice from before. The silence of something that was still there, but that for some reason I didn't understand, and wasn't going to understand tonight, had stopped advancing. Maybe the pulse. Maybe something I had no way to calculate. It didn't matter. It was what there was. Deb said something quietly. I didn't catch it and didn't ask her to repeat it. I kept looking at the communication panel in the second car. The emergency module, different from the one I'd burned out, was still intact. I got up, swiped my badge, pulled out the handset. Static. Then from very far away, a voice. Fragmented, almost unrecognizable, but a human voice. The dispatcher, or someone, trying the emergency channel from some point in the system that was still listening. I couldn't make out the words, it didn't matter. I held the button. "This is Ryan Mercer, badge 4471, train 714, between Kermack and Sox." I let go, held it again. "Someone copy. We need an immediate response." I released the button and waited. The voice came back. Still fragmented, still distant, but closer than before, like a signal finding its way through a partially burned system. Then the train moved. Slowly at first. A jolt, the kind of lurch that happens when the traction system re-engages after a power failure. Then smoother, building steadily, the rhythm I knew by heart. The rails started making the right sound. The car started vibrating the right way. Deb opened her eyes and looked at the window. The tunnel was moving outside. I kept watching the locked door between us and the other car until the lights of the Sox 35th Street station started appearing through the windows. First as a reflection in the glass, then as real brightness, yellow and solid and completely ordinary. The train stopped at the platform. The boarding doors opened. I didn't look back.